Most people who commit mass murder end up in one of two places: death row or a cell they'll never leave. But what happens in the courtroom right before that door closes forever? These are 10 school shooters and how they reacted when the rest of their lives were decided for them. Nicholas Cruz. This is Nicholas Cruz, a convicted mass murderer. On February 14, 2018, Cruz, then 19 years old, walked into Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, carrying an AR-15 rifle. He had been a student there before being expelled. That morning, he moved through the building's hallways and classrooms, firing for just over 6 minutes. When it was over, 17 people were dead and 17 more were wounded. He fled the scene by blending in with students evacuating the building and was arrested about an hour and 20 minutes later in nearby Coral Springs. Cruz was charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. In October of 2021, he pleaded guilty to all of them. That meant no trial, just a penalty phase, where a jury would decide between life in prison or the death penalty. For months, they heard from survivors, families, forensic experts. The prosecution laid out just how calculated the attack was, including the modifications Cruz had made to his rifle to get a more stable, accurate shot. The defense argued Cruz suffered from fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, citing a troubled childhood as grounds for mercy. On October 13, 2022, the jury came back. They found the state had proven all aggravating factors beyond a reasonable doubt, but they could not unanimously agree on death. The vote was 9-3 in favor of execution, and Florida law required every single juror to be on board. That one missing vote meant Cruz walked away from the death penalty. Life without parole it was. When the verdict was read, Cruz sat in his red jail jumpsuit with a medical mask over his face and barely moved. A journalist in the courtroom described his eyes as completely empty. Judge Elizabeth Scherer, who had no legal option other than to impose the life sentence, still took her moment. Then she formally sentenced Cruz to 34 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. After court concluded, she stepped down from the bench and hugged members of the prosecution and victims' families, a move that later got her formally reprimanded for showing judicial bias. Cruz is currently housed in a maximum security facility in Florida. He will die there. Cruz sat in silence while people screamed at him for hours. The next guy actually spoke back to the court before his sentence was handed down, and what he said is still being debated. Ethan Crumbley. This is Ethan Crumbley, the 15-year-old who opened fire at Oxford High School in Michigan. On November 30, 2021, Crumbley brought a semi-automatic handgun to school and shot into hallways and bathrooms. 4 students were killed: Madison Baldwin, 17, Tate Meyer, 16, Hannah Street Juliana, 14, and Justin Schilling, 17. 7 others were wounded. He was arrested at the school shortly after the shooting ended. What made this case especially damaging was what had happened just hours before. School officials had called Crumbley's parents in that morning after a teacher found disturbing drawings on his desk, including a bleeding figure, a gun, and phrases like, "The thoughts won't stop," and "help me." His parents came in, looked at the drawings, and declined to take him home. The gun he used had been purchased for him by his father just 4 days earlier as an early Christmas gift. Crumbley was charged with 1 count of terrorism causing death, 4 counts of first-degree murder, and 19 additional charges. In October of 2022, he pleaded guilty to all 24. Because he was a minor at the time of the attack, a special hearing was required before he could be sentenced to life without parole. In September of 2023, Oakland County Circuit Court Judge Kwame Rowe ruled that he was eligible for the harshest possible sentence. The sentencing hearing took place on December 8, 2023. 29 people gave victim impact statements. Every single one of them asked for life without parole. Judge Rowe sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Crumbley barely reacted when the sentence was read. His defense attorney said afterward that he was remorseful and that spending a lifetime behind bars would be extremely difficult for him. His parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, were separately convicted of involuntary manslaughter and each sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. It was one of the first times in American legal history that parents were held criminally responsible for a mass shooting carried out by their child. That case was defined by what the adults around him failed to do. The next one goes back even further, to 1997, and to a kid who everyone around him genuinely believed was doing fine right up until he wasn't. Michael Carneal. This is Michael Carneal, who opened fire at a morning prayer gathering at Heath High School in Kentucky. On December 1st, 1997, around 40 students had gathered in the lobby of Heath High School in West Paducah for their before-school prayer meeting. 14-year-old Carneal arrived at around 7:45. He told his sister the blanket folded across his lap was covering a school project. Wrapped inside it were 2 shotguns and 2 rifles he had stolen from a neighbor's garage on Thanksgiving, along with a Ruger pistol he had taken in the weeks before. When the prayer group began to break up, Carneal put in earplugs, pulled out the pistol, and fired 10 rounds from about 10 feet away. Nicole Hadley, 14, was killed. Jessica James, 17, was killed. Case Steger, 15, was killed. All 3 died from gunshots to the head or neck. 6 students total were wounded, including Missy Jenkins Smith, who was shot in the chest and permanently paralyzed. Carneal dropped the pistol and surrendered to the school principal. A fellow student, Benjamin Strong, later testified that Carneal laid the gun down of his own accord and told another student to kill him. During questioning, he said voices had commanded him to shoot. Doctors later diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. In October of 1998, Carneal pleaded guilty but mentally ill. Under Kentucky law at the time, the maximum sentence for a juvenile was life with the possibility of parole after 25 years, which is exactly what he received. 25 years went by. In September of 2022, Carneal, then 39, appeared via video for his parole hearing. Victims and families packed the virtual courtroom to oppose his release. Missy Jenkins Smith spoke from her wheelchair and told the board that Carneal had sentenced her to life in a wheelchair without the possibility of parole, so the question was why he should get a second chance. Then Carneal made a critical mistake. When asked about his current mental state, he admitted he still hears voices. He claimed he could resist them now, but then revealed that just 2 days before the hearing, a voice had told him to jump down a stairway. A board member noted that his prognosis remained poor and that he continued to experience paranoid thoughts with violent content. The Kentucky Parole Board voted 7-0 to deny his release. He remains incarcerated, with commutation or a governor's pardon, the only remaining paths to freedom. Carneal was alone when he did it. The next case involved 2 people who walked into school together, and the way their victims responded in court is something that's hard to forget. Alec McKinney. This is Alec McKinney, the younger of the 2 shooters in the STEM School Highlands Ranch attack in Colorado. On May 7, 2019, 16-year-old McKinney had been planning the attack for some time. He told investigators afterward that his goal was to target classmates who had bullied him over his gender identity. He recruited 18-year-old Devon Erickson to help, and during lunch that day, the 2 went to Erickson's house and used an axe and crowbar to force open a gun safe. They took 4 firearms and went back to school. In classroom 107, students were watching The Princess Bride during lunch. Erickson pulled out a Glock and told the room nobody was moving. McKinney fired a revolver from the other side of the room. 18-year-old Kendrick Castillo lunged at Erickson, trying to tackle him. Erickson fired 4 times, striking Castillo in the chest. Castillo died. 2 other students, Joshua Jones and Brendan Bialy, wrestled the gun away from Erickson. An armed security guard caught McKinney in the hallway. 8 students were wounded in total. In February of 2020, McKinney pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and 16 other charges. Because Colorado law at the time prohibited life without parole for juveniles, the sentencing hearing centered on how many years he would serve. The hearing took place on July 24, 2020, via video conference. Nearly 24 victims and family members gave statements. McKinney then delivered a 22-minute apology, crying throughout. He said he didn't deserve leniency. He also addressed would-be school shooters directly, revealing he had already received fan mail while in detention and told anyone thinking about a school shooting to get help instead. Judge Jeffrey Holmes sentenced McKinney to life with the possibility of parole after 40 years, plus 38 additional years. A Colorado law for juvenile offenders means he could be eligible for parole after 25 years if he completes a specific prison program. He was 16 when he committed the crimes. The Castillo family told reporters afterward that McKinney had shed what they called crocodile tears. McKinney's case was complicated by motive and age. The next one is about as straightforward as it gets. and the victim was 6 years old. Jesse Osborne. This is Jesse Osborne, who at 14 years old shot his own father and then drove to an elementary school. On September 28, 2016, Osborne shot his father 3 times while he sat in his recliner at home. He then kissed his pet rabbit and dogs, called his grandmother crying, and drove his father's truck 3 miles to Townville Elementary School in South Carolina. Earlier that year, he had been expelled from middle school for bringing a hatchet and machete to campus. At 1:45 in the afternoon, he crashed the truck through the school fence and jumped out with a pistol. A first-grade class was outside on the playground, celebrating a birthday party. He fired at the students, shouting that he hated his life. 6-year-old Jacob Hall was shot in the leg, severing a major artery. A teacher was shot in the shoulder. His gun jammed after about 12 seconds of firing. A volunteer firefighter tackled him to the ground and held him there until deputies arrived. Jacob Hall died 3 days later. His community held a superhero-themed funeral for him. Investigators later found that Osborne had been obsessed with school shootings for months, had researched Columbine and Sandy Hook extensively, and had been part of an online chat group where members actively encouraged him to attack. He told investigators he was disappointed that killing hadn't felt the way he expected. He said he did it because he felt his life was miserable. Osborne pleaded guilty in December of 2018 to avoid a jury trial. His sentencing hearing took place in November of 2019. Prosecutors argued that he showed no genuine remorse and had continuously lied for his own benefit, including researching mental disorder symptoms online in an attempt to manipulate psychiatric evaluations. Judge Lawton McIntosh sentenced Osborne to life without parole for the 2 murders, plus 30 additional years for attempted murder. He noted on the record that he was troubled by Osborne's apparent lack of genuine remorse. In 2023, Osborne's attorneys requested a resentencing hearing where he apologized to victims for the first time. The judge denied the request. He remains sentenced to life without parole. Every case so far has ended in deaths. The next one almost didn't, and the way it ended has a lot to do with one moment of hesitation. Sky Bouche. This is Sky Bouche, who walked onto a high school campus with a shotgun and then changed his mind. April 20th, 2018 was the 19th anniversary of the Columbine massacre. 19-year-old Bouche arrived at Forest High School in Ocala, Florida, that morning carrying a guitar case with a sawed-off shotgun inside, wearing a tactical vest and a backpack loaded with extra shells and gloves. He had dropped out of the school 2 years earlier after learning that Florida's Baker Act would prevent him from joining the Marine Corps. The FBI had flagged him for threatening social media posts supporting school shooters at least 5 years before this day. At 8:29, Bouche fired 1 shot through a classroom door. A fragment struck 17-year-old Evan Eckenroth in the ankle. That was it. Something changed in him right after he pulled the trigger. He dropped the shotgun and walked over to a nearby classroom where he surrendered directly to teacher Kelly Panasuk. A school resource officer had already heard the shot. 12 minutes after he first entered campus, Bouche was in handcuffs. Body camera footage captured him apologizing to the deputy. He said he wasn't raised by the right people, mentioned a home environment with violence and medication abuse, and said he had felt ignored. He told deputies he wanted to go to jail. He explained he had specifically researched both church and school shootings and concluded that school shootings received more media coverage, which is why he chose a school. He later called the whole thing a cry for help. He was charged with terrorism, aggravated assault with a firearm, carrying a concealed weapon, possession of a short-barreled shotgun, and armed trespass on school property. He initially pleaded not guilty, but on April 22, 2021, he appeared before Circuit Judge Lisa Herndon and changed his plea to no contest. Judge Herndon sentenced him to 30 years in prison, followed by 30 years of probation. He must serve a minimum of 25 years before becoming eligible for release, at which point he'll be 47 years old. He was also ordered to pay more than $14,000 in restitution. Bouche told reporters after sentencing that he deeply regretted what he had done and believed he deserved to be locked up. Bouche got 30 years. The next shooter killed 10 people, and over 7 years later, still hasn't faced a single day in court for it. Demetrios Pagourtzis. This is Demetrios Pagourtzis, the 17-year-old behind one of the deadliest school shootings in Texas history. On the morning of May 18, 2018, Pagourtzis walked into a first-period art class at Santa Fe High School, wearing a long black trench coat he wore almost every single day, even in the sweltering South Texas heat. Hidden underneath it were two weapons he had taken from his own father, a Remington 870 shotgun and a .38 caliber revolver. He opened fire at 7:32 in the morning, moving between two connected art classrooms. 10 people were killed, 8 students and 2 teachers, and 13 others were wounded. He then walked outside and surrendered to police, telling officers he didn't have the courage to follow through on his original plan to kill himself afterward. In his confession, Pagourtzis said he had deliberately chosen not to shoot students he liked so that he could have his story told. He had also placed improvised explosive devices around the campus, including a pressure cooker bomb and CO2 canisters, though none of them went off. One of the victims, 16-year-old Shana Fisher, had reportedly been rejecting Pagourtzis' advances for months. About a week before the shooting, she finally stood up to him publicly in class. Her mother, Sadie Bays, told reporters that she believed that moment of public humiliation is what made Shana the first person he shot. As for what happened in court, the honest answer is, not much, at least not yet. In November of 2019, a judge declared Pagourtzis incompetent to stand trial due to severe mental illness, and he was committed to a maximum security state psychiatric facility in Texas. As of February 2026, he has been found incompetent for the 7th consecutive year. The criminal case remains completely on hold. Because he was 17 at the time, he cannot face the death penalty, and his maximum exposure, if he is ever actually tried and convicted, would be 40 years to life. The families of 10 people have been waiting more than 7 years for a trial that may never come. That case is in limbo. This next one started with someone who wanted to die and ended, 2 decades later, with something almost no one expected. Alec McKinney. This is Charles Andrew Williams, known as Andy, 15 years old when he shot 2 of his classmates dead. On March 5, 2001, Williams entered a boys' bathroom at Santana High School in Santee, California, at 9:20 in the morning. He was carrying a .22 caliber revolver he had taken from his father's locked gun cabinet. He shot a student inside the restroom, then stepped out into the hallway and kept firing, going back into the bathroom to reload between rounds. When officers finally reached him, he dropped the gun and put his hands up. 2 students were dead, 14-year-old Brian Zuckor and 17-year-old Randy Gordon, and 13 others had been wounded, including 2 staff members. In the weeks before the shooting, Williams had told at least 2 friends what he was planning to do. Both thought he was joking. He had also reportedly warned a school security guard he was going to bring a gun to campus. No report was ever filed. Years later, Williams explained that at 15, he had felt completely numb. He said he hadn't expected people to actually die. His plan, he said, was to make a lot of noise until the cops showed up and then get shot by them. Suicide by cop. He changed his mind at the last second and surrendered instead. On June 20th, 2002, facing a potential 400-year prison term, Williams pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 13 counts of attempted murder. On August 15th, 2002, a California judge sentenced him as an adult to 50 years to life. At the hearing, Williams apologized. At least one victim came forward to say 50 years wasn't nearly enough. What happened over the next 2 decades is genuinely unusual. Williams earned a certification as a drug and alcohol counselor inside prison. He wrote individual apology letters to every single victim. He assisted federal investigators on unrelated cases. When California law was amended to allow juvenile offenders serving the functional equivalent of a life sentence to petition for resentencing, Williams applied. His first parole hearing was in September of 2024. 22 victims testified against his release, and the board denied him, citing continued risk to public safety. Then, on January 6, 2026, a San Diego Superior Court judge granted his petition to have his sentence recalled and transferred the case to juvenile court. Williams watched the ruling remotely from prison and broke down crying when it was read. The district attorney's office filed an immediate appeal, calling the decision a disservice to victims. That legal battle is ongoing. 2.5 decades of prison changed Andy Williams. The last case on this list is the most recent sentencing of any shooter we've covered, and the person at the center of it wrote down exactly what he thought about what he did. Austin Thompson. This is Austin Thompson, 15 years old when he carried out the deadliest mass shooting in Raleigh's history. His sentence was handed down on February 13, 2026, making this the most recent case in this video. The attack started inside his own home. Thompson shot his 16-year-old brother James in the head, then stabbed him 57 times in the neck. He left a handwritten note on his bedroom desk before walking out. It read, "The reason I did this is because I hate humans. They are destroying the planet." The note went on to explain, "He killed James because he would get in my way." He also wrote, "I have no regrets. I'm not mental either. I was sane when I did this." Dressed in camouflage and carrying a shotgun and handgun, Thompson then walked out into the Headingham neighborhood and started shooting his neighbors. Nicole Connors, 52, was shot on her front porch. Off-duty Raleigh police officer Gabriel Torres, 29, was shot on his way to work. Mary Marshall, 34, was shot on a nearby greenway. Susan Carnatz, 49, was shot and killed. 2 others were hit and survived. Police tracked Thompson to a shed miles from his home, where he was found with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. 5 people were dead across 4 crime scenes. Prosecutors later revealed that in the months before the attack, Thompson had been searching online for school shootings, bomb-making, and firearms tactics. Inside a hollowed-out chapstick tube found in his room was a handwritten diagram of explosive materials. On January 21, 2026, Thompson pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 5 additional charges, about 2 weeks before his scheduled trial date. His defense team argued the shooting happened during a dissociative episode brought on by a prescription acne medication called minocycline. Judge Paul Ridgway rejected that argument completely. On February 13, 2026, Ridgway sentenced Thompson to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Before reading the sentence, he named each victim individually. He called it hard to conceive of a greater display of pure malice and said Thompson represented the rare juvenile offender whose crimes reflect irreparable corruption. Thompson said nothing. He was handcuffed and led out. The defense immediately announced plans to appeal on constitutional grounds given Thompson's age. He turned 18 in 2023. He is not getting out.